When you get to my age, sweetheart, you realize memory is like mist. It curls around the edges of the truth, softens what it can't quite bear, and sometimes it hides things you're not ready to remember. I wasn't planning to tell anyone this story. Not your mother, not your uncle, not even your late grandfather, when he was alive. But tonight, with the rain tapping that rhythm on the roof like it used to in the hills, I think it's time. I was 19 when I took that drive through the Appalachian mountains. It was the summer of 1964. The air smelled of pine sap and wet clay, and my little Ford Fairlane coughed every mile like it was tired of the incline. I'd been on my way from Knoxville to visit a friend near Boone. She'd written saying her father got a new job, and they'd moved up there, closer to the Blue Ridge Parkway. But around dusk, the fog rolled in. You've never seen fog like that, child. It didn't just blur the road, it swallowed it. The headlights turned into two tired yellow eyes, straining to see through a white wall. I slowed to a crawl, and when I reached a fork I didn't remember from the map, I figured it led to a town where I could spend the night. The sign was half rotted, letters faint. Welcome to Old Hallow. Never heard of it, but the arrow pointed east, down a narrow dirt road lined with tall pines that looked more like sentinels than trees. I drove maybe 15 minutes before I saw lights through the mist. Lanterns, warm and flickering. The road opened into a little hollow nestled between hills. The place looked like something from a painting. Wooden cabins with stone chimneys, people moving about with baskets and aprons, and that smell, freshly baked bread and wood smoke. I parked beside a well and stepped out. A man approached, middle-aged, beard streaked with silver, eyes kind. "Evening, miss," he said, tipping his hat. "You're a stranger to Old Hallow. Got lost in the fog, did you?" I nodded, half embarrassed. I was on my way to Boone. My car could use a rest, and maybe I could too. "Well, you're welcome here. Martha's inn's just down yonder. She'll see you right," he said, pointing toward a 2-story cabin with a wooden porch and a sign carved by hand. "The lantern's rest." Inside, a woman with gray-streaked hair and a gingham dress greeted me like she'd known me all her life. "Oh, bless you. You must be hungry," she said. "Sit, child. Sit before your legs forget how." And I did. The table was set with roasted chicken, cornbread, and soup that smelled like home, even though I was miles away from it. The people who came and went from the inn were cheerful, curious, and polite. They spoke with that old mountain twang, soft and slow, like music half-remembered. They asked where I came from, what I did, what the world was like beyond the ridges. I told them about televisions, jukeboxes, and cars that almost drove themselves. They chuckled, shaking their heads like I was telling tall tales. One old man said, "The world's running too fast for its own good. Out here, time keeps its manners." I laughed, but there was something in his tone that settled deep inside me, like a pebble sinking through still water. That night I stayed in a small room upstairs. The bed was soft, quilted by hand, and the lantern by the window burned steady against the mist outside. I could hear faint fiddle music from somewhere down the hill, slow, mournful, and hauntingly beautiful. When I woke in the morning, the fog had lifted. The air was so clean it almost hurt to breathe. I came downstairs expecting to find breakfast and company, but the inn was empty. The chairs were neatly tucked in, and the fire had burned down to ash. I stepped outside. The village was quiet. Too quiet. No smoke from chimneys, no chatter, no footsteps. Just the sound of a creek gurgling nearby. I called out, "Hello?" But my voice came back hollow. I walked down to where I'd parked my car. The Fairlane was there, dew glistening on the windshield. But the road I'd driven in on, the one that wound between the trees, was gone. In its place was a wall of thick forest, not fallen branches, not overgrowth, full-grown trees, old and solid, as if they'd been there for decades. My heart started to hammer. I tried walking around the perimeter, searching for any sign of the path. Nothing. Just endless trees and birdsong. Panic set in. I ran back toward the well, toward the inn, calling for someone, anyone. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton. Finally, I climbed into the car and started driving, or trying to. The dirt path that led out of the village was uneven, more like a trail than a road. After half an hour, I came out onto the main highway just a few miles from Boone. When I stopped at a gas station, the attendant looked at me funny when I asked for directions back to Old Hallow. "Old what now?" he said. "Old Hallow. Small village. Maybe 10, 15 miles from here." He scratched his head. "Ain't no place like that around here, miss. Been working this station 20 years. Closest settlement that-a-way's empty land." I showed him the road on my map. "Right there. There's a turnoff, see?" He leaned over, squinted, and said, "That road don't exist, ma'am. Never did." I didn't argue. I thanked him, bought a bottle of soda just to have something to do with my hands, and drove on. But I couldn't get that village out of my head. The warmth of those people, the kindness in their eyes, the smell of bread and pinewood smoke. It felt real, every bit of it. When I got home, I told my parents what happened. My father frowned, said I must have fallen asleep in the car and dreamed it. My mother just smiled softly and said, "You always had a vivid imagination." Maybe they were right. I tried to convince myself it had been the fog, exhaustion, some strange trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I could still taste that soup, still remember the calluses on the innkeeper's hands when she'd patted mine. Years went by. I married, had your mother, and buried your grandfather. Life filled itself with ordinary things, laundry, bills, birthdays, and broken fences. But sometimes when fog rolled in from the river and the night grew quiet, I'd hear that same fiddle tune, faint and distant, and my heart would ache like I'd lost something precious. And then, 50 years later, everything changed. It was a Sunday morning. I was having coffee, reading the news on that little tablet your uncle bought me, when a headline stopped me cold. "Archaeologists discover lost village in Appalachian foothills." I opened it. The photos showed a cluster of wooden cabins unearthed in a forest clearing. They called it Old Hallow. Said it had been a settlement from the 1800s, vanished without record sometime after the Civil War. The article said no roads led to it, no modern maps mentioned it. It had been found only after a landslide exposed part of the foundations. The researchers found tools, dishes, and personal items perfectly preserved under layers of soil. But one detail made my hands tremble so bad, I almost dropped the tablet. They'd found an inn, and inside that inn, they discovered a hand-carved sign, "The Lantern's Rest." My first thought, sweetheart, was that someone had made a mistake. That this Old Hallow was just another village with the same name. But the photos told me otherwise. The shape of the well, the stone base of the inn. Even the pattern of the wooden beams were the same as I remembered them. The article went on to say that carbon dating suggested the village had been buried for over 150 years. One archaeologist described it as eerily preserved, as though time simply stopped. I read every word with a pounding heart. They mentioned discovering fragments of clothing, tools, and handwritten ledgers inside the inn. But what struck me most was the last line. The site was sealed off after reports of unusual fog activity and erratic compass readings in the area. I don't know if you've ever felt your blood run cold, truly cold. It's not fear exactly. It's recognition. I sat there staring at that glowing screen, realizing I'd stood in a village that, by all earthly accounts, hadn't existed for a century before I was born. I needed to know more. I called the number listed for the local historical society, pretending to be a journalist writing a piece on Appalachian folklore. The woman who answered sounded polite but weary, as if she'd been getting too many curious calls. "Old Hallow?" she said. "That site's restricted now. Landslide damage, government paperwork, the usual mess." I pressed on, asking if she knew any legends tied to it. She hesitated. "Folks used to say it was cursed, that the villagers vanished overnight, some sickness or maybe the war. Others said it wasn't that they died, just that they slipped away." "Slipped away?" I asked. "Into what?" "Into the fog," she said simply, and hung up. For days I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lantern light glowing in the mist, the kind faces of people who shouldn't have been there. Logic screamed that it was impossible, but the part of me that still believed in old mountain magic, the part that had grown up hearing ghost tales whispered by candlelight, knew there was more to it. So, a week later, I packed a small bag, printed out the article's coordinates, and set out for the mountains again. The drive was long, and the road had changed in 50 years. Paved highways cut through old trails, and modern signs replaced the wooden ones that once leaned crooked in the wind. Still, when I reached the foothills, a strange familiarity stirred in me. The trees leaned the same way. The air carried that same resin-sweet scent of pine and damp soil. I parked my car near a barricade where the Forest Service had placed a faded warning sign. "No entry. Archaeological site." But I wasn't going to turn back. I've lived long enough to know that some rules are meant for the living, not for the remembering. I followed the trail on foot, through brush and mud, until the world grew quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the faint whisper of wind. That's when I saw it. The fog had started to rise again, thin and silver like smoke curling off the ground. I kept walking until the trees opened into a clearing, and there it was, Old Hallow. Only, it wasn't buried anymore. The cabin stood just as I remembered, wooden walls slick with dew, the well moss-covered but solid, and the inn standing proud and silent, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The sight made my knees tremble. I stepped forward slowly, afraid the whole thing might dissolve if I moved too fast. The door to the inn creaked open when I touched it, releasing a breath of air that smelled of earth and age. Inside, the furniture was still there, covered in dust but perfectly arranged. The fireplace was cold, the lanterns dark. On the counter lay a small book, a guest ledger, the paper yellowed but intact. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Each line held a name, written in elegant cursive, all dated between 1820 and 1863. Then at the very bottom, in a different ink, faded but unmistakable, was a final entry. June 3rd, 1964. Evelyn Carter. My name. I nearly dropped the book. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought the room tilted. I ran my fingers over the letters. The ink wasn't new. It had aged with the rest. But that date, the day I'd stayed there, was more than a century after the village was supposed to have disappeared. I backed away, heart racing. That's when I heard it. Faint music, the same fiddle tune that had haunted my dreams for decades. It came from outside, echoing softly through the fog. I followed the sound out to the clearing, where shapes began to form in the mist. People. At first I thought they were tricks of light, but then I saw faces. Familiar faces. The man who'd greeted me that night. Martha, the innkeeper. The old fiddler on the porch. They looked exactly as they had. Not ghostly, not frightening. Just there, as if time had remembered them after all these years. The man smiled at me. "You came back," he said. His voice was warm, like a memory that never aged. I had to know," I whispered. "What happened to you?" "To this place?" He looked toward the fog curling at the edge of the clearing. "Old Hallow was never meant to stay," he said. "When the war came, the sickness took half our folk. The rest prayed to be spared, and the mountain listened. It folded us away, kept us safe from time. Every few decades, when the fog's just right, it opens the path, only for those who still remember kindness." His eyes softened. "You found us once because you needed shelter. You find us now because you need peace." I felt tears sting my eyes. "But you're gone. All of you." Martha stepped forward, her apron faintly shimmering in the mist. "Not gone, child. Just waiting. The mountain holds its own. Souls, stories, and those who wandered in by accident." She smiled that same gentle smile. "You were kind to us once, Evelyn. You broke no peace, asked no questions. That's why we let you go." The fog began to thicken around them, turning their forms hazy, like fading photographs. "Wait!" I cried. "What do you mean, let me go?" The man's voice drifted back. "Because you still had a life to live, but not all who find Old Hallow wish to leave it." And with that, they were gone. The clearing emptied, leaving only silence and a faint smell of wood smoke. When I looked around again, the cabins had begun to fade too. Not crumble, but dissolve into mist, as if the mountain was reclaiming them. I stumbled backward, terrified and awed all at once, until I found myself back among the trees. The fog lifted as suddenly as it had come, and when it cleared, the clearing was gone. Just wild forest stretching in every direction. My car was still there, the sky dimming toward evening. I drove home in silence, the sound of that fiddle tune still echoing in my ears. That was the last time I ever went back to those mountains. A few weeks later, the news reported that the site had collapsed after another landslide, completely sealed off. No one was hurt. But the article said the archaeologists lost all access to the area. "As if the earth swallowed it whole," they wrote. I didn't need the explanation. I already knew. Old Hallow didn't want to be found again. It had shown itself just long enough to settle an old debt. You see, child, sometimes places remember us the way we remember them. Not in straight lines, but in loops. Folded moments where time bends to touch itself. I didn't stumble on that village by chance all those years ago. I think it called to me. Maybe it needed someone to carry its story out into the world, to remind folks that kindness lingers longer than life itself. Or maybe, just maybe, the mountain wanted someone to tell the tale before it closed its gates for good. I still dream of Old Hallow now and then. In my dreams, the lanterns glow brighter than any electric light, and the air smells of cornbread and pine. Martha waves from the porch, and the fiddler nods, playing that tune that sounds like home. I wake up with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from something gentler. A strange, grateful ache. Because for one night in 1964, I walked through a place that wasn't supposed to exist. And for one brief moment, I was part of a world that time itself chose to keep secret. So, when you hear foghorns in the valley or see the mist rolling down the hills, don't be afraid. Sometimes what disappears isn't gone. It's just waiting for the right heart to remember it. And if you ever find yourself lost in the mountains, and you see lantern light through the trees, follow it. You might just find Old Hallow. But if you do, promise me one thing, sweetheart. When morning comes, don't look back.